nobody's stupid enough to think that they know all the answers and have it right. And everything that has meaning, will only get better if we listen and learn from each other, and also avoid being defensive. You cannot turn a deaf ear to voices that rightfully are demanding to be heard within your organisation.
Hello and welcome back to this first episode of a brand new series of Media Voices. We're the media-focused podcast that takes a look at all the news and the views from the media world over the past week. I'm Chris Sutcliffe.
I'm Esther Thorpe.
And I'm Peter Houston. And that clip you just heard was from our first interview of 2023. It's me talking to Richard Reeves, CEO of the Association of Online Publishers here in the UK, about diversity and inclusion in media. Now, the irony of two older white dudes discussing issues of diversity was not lost on either of us. But what I took away from the chat was that we especially have a responsibility to be open-minded, to challenge our peers, to encourage everyone to open their eyes to the opportunities that diversity and inclusion can bring. And it was a good chat. So
I mean, there's some ageism stuff in there as well, right?
Yeah, we talked about ageism. That still makes me feel a little bit weird. But that's the ageism thing. The point with the ageism thing is it's specifically or particularly older women that find it hard to get back into the workplace. So yeah, it was a great chat. It was really good.
I just saw Tamsin Outhwaite tweet about it.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So before we get onto that cheery chat, we're going to go through our news roundup. And this week, the big news has been the publication of the Reuters Institute's latest predictions piece.
Really?
So
not that book?
We're not talking about that, at least this week. The Reuters Institute has published its latest journalism, media and technology trends and predictions after surveying 300 plus media executives from all around the world. Esther, what would you say are some of those top level insights that you've taken away from it?
Confidence. Not great.
As in lack of? Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think it's sort of 75% at the start of last year, people sort of feeling relatively confident about the year. That is now down to 44%, which given the world is not entirely surprising. Another probably not a particular surprise to anybody is that subscriptions, they're seen as the most important revenue stream for 80% of publishers. But actually, the majority of them are still expecting some or a lot of growth in subscriptions and paid content income this year. So I don't know if that people are sort of still quite new to it, so there's still a lot of mileage to go, or are people that are more established sort of looking at it and saying, no, there's still ways we can attract people, people still wanted to sign up. It sort of goes counter, I suppose, to a lot of the stuff we were discussing later last year about a slowdown, maybe even a reduction. Like a lot of publishers don't know. They're saying, "Well, no, we expect it to continue." So that's great.
Peter seems unsure.
I think there's a factor here that is not Reuters' fault at all, but there's a lag, right? They do the research towards the end of 2022, and the stuff with the cost of living crisis and inflation, particularly, was really just starting to come through at the end. The last quarter.
But I think when we discussed our special episode, our podcast, our subscription special episode, that must be on sort of September, October. It was like a lot of people already forecasting that then.
It takes people a while to change their minds.
I wonder if there's also a peer pressure to be seen to be going like, absolutely, we still got headroom for growth, absolutely. But it does kind of fly in the face of a piece we included in the newsletter not too long ago that was talking about this year is going to be the year where people focus on revenue per user rather than growing the user base.
That's where the writing, the text of this is actually quite interesting, because it's not that they see a lot of growth in subscriber numbers, it's that they see a growth in paid content income. So is it that, they're not going to focus on the cut price deals and all that, and it's possibly fewer subscribers but more income from that? So yeah, I think the wording there leaves that open to interpretation.
That totally makes sense. And there's actually a really good piece by Lucinda Southern in Adweek this week talking about that kind of meshing of first-party data coming out of subscriptions and advertising. So premium advertising sales sort of bolstered by subscription data. I think that's, obviously coming from a million years ago when advertising actually was more interesting. I think that is actually a really interesting angle on this. That subscription data is going to support advertising revenue.
Oh yeah, 100%. Before we move on to formats and where we see, growth in terms of media and where people are actually going to spend more of their time, what do we think about bundling? Because there's something in there about this idea that we're going to be seeing a lot more bundles.
Well, we had a fight about this at the start of the year, didn't we?
Well, calling it a fight, I think, is a bit strong, but we definitely had a what was it? What's the diplomatic? What did they call it?
Disagreement.
A robust exchange. Yeah, I mean, what Reuters is saying is bundling is going to be a big deal. But, this being magnanimous because I actually won. Esther's point is not. She's not wrong. She's just not as right as I am.
They're not mutually exclusive things.
No, they're absolutely not.
There are thousands of publishers out there experimenting with lots of different things. Now, my point, and this was in my Nimilab prediction, is that I think because of the pressures, and we have seen this already with publishers like the FT, they've got their FT Edit app, which is like a 99p app. Tortoise have gone and done like subscriber-only podcasts on Apple, which are, you think, were directly in conflict with their main membership revenue, but actually they've sort of ended up being a bit of a conversion thing. Is that publishers are sort of looking for ways to entice people to try paid content with them that isn't necessarily the full subscription. And I still think we'll see a lot more of that this year. One
of the things that I think we were all interested in, because obviously we have a vested interest, is this idea that podcasts are still seen as being high up the agenda. So we've seen that podcasts and newsletters are where a lot of publishers say they're going to be putting more resources this year.
Well, they're both about 70%, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're all kind of hovering around that very, very positive number for us. But Peter, you've put something in here about finite formats. So what is that?
I think it was interesting that the chatting around this was obviously the opportunity, which is we'll end up talking about the revenue side of this in a minute, but engagement and audience growth and all that is really, really positive. And I think that's what people are seeing in both podcasts and newsletters. But this idea that these are finite formats, it's whether it's once a week or once a day, they're bounded. You go in, you read it, or you listen to it. It's not easier. It's harder in so many ways because you can't just fire crap out all the time and hopefully something in among that will land. You've actually got to think about what is your edition, what is your episode, what's going to be in there, and you've got to engage people in that box. But I think that's the beauty of publishing. That's what's so amazing about publishing. Is that idea of targeting rather than just this constant stream of stuff.
I thought you were going to say what's amazing about publishing is that it's totally cyclical, and in 4 years' time we're going to be back to that fire hose thing. In fact, isn't it interesting that only this week we've seen complete disintegration of the valuations of places like BuzzFeed, which did rely on that fire hose type thing, and yet it's kind of those edition-based digital outlets that are doing better.
This is actually a comment Nick made. So one of the predictions that came up is that it was about AI. And I feel like there's been a bit of a sea change in that in the last couple of months. Like now everybody can sort of see where it's going. And I think it's pointing towards that fire hose thing. AI is just going to be used to feed that fire hose. And Nick even sort of, he said that he predicted there's going to be this huge explosion of automated or semi-automated media in the next few years, for good or ill. And he actually said this is where publishers have got the opportunity to really prove the value of the human editing and curation. And there's absolutely no harm in using AI to supplement, but that the human value will really come to the forefront as we sort of learn to navigate just this new landscape where we don't know what's been written by a human and what hasn't.
But this is where humans are awful, right?
Right, okay.
No disagreement.
Well, because you know what's going on in so many boardrooms and management offices. Like, oh my God, this is good enough that we can get rid of the humans. It's not like, oh, this is an opportunity to supplement the work that our humans do. It's like, this is a chance to get rid of the humans. It should
what you're saying about emotion and the fact that the AI can't sort of distinguish or properly put across emotion.
And also reporting. AI can only know what's already known.
Yeah.
Whereas reporting, going and finding stuff out,
Well, AI doesn't have shoes to go out and do that shoe leather journalism.
Yeah.
But I think I was reading about, we've got Chat GPT-3, and I was reading some of the stuff about GPT-4, which is, just the sheer amount of data to which that has access. The stat that got thrown around was, if you feed it one single sentence prompt, it will write a novel length, sort of like exploration of that.
Or a memoir, perhaps.
Or a memoir, yeah. So there's a publication on CNET, I think yesterday or maybe 2 days ago, talking about how they're using AI. And they said exactly that. They're using the term very consciously, AI assist. What they want to use AI for is just kind of getting rid of that rote stuff so that the journalists can focus on actually going out and writing stuff and also, talking to people.
There's been some stuff that's come up that because the AI is being fed everything, that it's also not right. Like, it churns out stuff that is not correct, and that yes, I know humans can technically do that, but you do still need like human oversight to be like, yeah, this is. I saw some really good examples on Twitter over Christmas where they'd asked ChatGPT some questions, and it just given them the wrong answers, and then like doubled down on it. It's like, okay, this is starting to sound quite human now.
That makes me like AI a lot more. That's humanized it for me. The fact that it f***ed up and then was too embarrassed to back down.
I think we're going to need the humans for a bit yet.
The humans. Ooh. So just before we move on, platforms not high up on the agenda according to Reuters. So Facebook received a -30 net score in planning for publishers. That seems high to me again. Twitter, obviously under the cosh, is only -28, whereas others are getting positive scores. Obviously TikTok, I don't know how wise it is to be putting resources into TikTok quite at the moment. Not in terms of, the audience being there, but just in terms of regulatory stuff coming down the pipe. Search, Instagram and YouTube are all positive.
I think people are just tired of Facebook's crap. Is it news or is it not news? Or is there a tab or is there not a tab? Are we doing newsletters or are we not doing newsletters? And I think people have just gone, you know what? This is just too much. There's too much change here. There's not enough consistency in terms of either audience or earning money.
It's one of the reasons I'm surprised that Facebook got a lower score than Twitter, because Twitter, to me, surely like the concern there over the audiences and the long-term aspect of that is even more pressing than Facebook. Although it is 2023 and it is still here.
And if you listen to what's his knob? Elmo. Elon. His audience is growing and engagement is growing. It's just that it's all nut jobs.
Yeah. That fantastic joke that people get making whenever Elon says, engagement on Twitter's never been higher, is people going like, oh yeah, my house may be on fire, but there's a lot of people in the yard watching it burn. And Peter, you mentioned the metaverse there. That has fallen right off publishers' interest. So digital videos have seen an increase in priority, but the metaverse, AR and VR have dropped from 8% last year in terms of interest down to 5% this year. And I think that's actually really good, because without the hype, publishers can do appropriately sized experiments within those spaces, because the user base is growing, albeit very slowly. Without that hype of, we've got to be in the metaverse, we can actually see some genuinely good experiments that might deliver a little bit of revenue rather than just going absolutely mental with some of the worst design things I've ever seen in my entire life.
That holds true for the whole Web3 type of thing, with NFTs and tokens and all that seems to have kind of slid off the agenda.
It's that cycle, isn't it? You get like the massive hype, and then you get the trough of disillusionment, and then you actually get into the actual use cases and how it can actually be of use. I was slightly surprised at the digital video increase, because that showed an increase in priority. Where are people putting that if Facebook
TikTok.
is sort of over-promising?
Yeah, TikTok, some of YouTube's new stuff.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's back to the social video.
And moving on to our news in brief. Podcasts. You're listening to one right now, and they're both one of the biggest and best opportunities for publishers this year. And also one of the biggest losers as the recession begins to bite. How do you square that circle? Well, the former assertion comes from YouGov, which states that 13% of respondents from the UK said that they're going to increase their use of podcasts this year, while the latter comes from a Vulture survey of people working in the podcasting space. So on the one hand, we have people going like, absolutely, audience is going to grow. like massively, it's going to be the next great space for journalism and entertainment and all this kind of stuff. And on the other hand, you have people like who are actually working in it, like us, going like, "Oh my God, this year is going to be an absolute nightmare." But there's actually no contradiction in those two assertions. One is about kind of the audience growth. I think that they're right. There's going to be a huge growth this year. And the other is around monetization.
It's the same kind of lack of confidence you're seeing across all advertising, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, can I just use that as a segue into my little nib this week?
Please do.
Because what was interesting was Ben Smith's first newsletter of the year, his media newsletter for Semaphore, which he actually put out on the 1st of January, which is...
Come on now, Ben.
Herculean as far as I'm concerned. He probably wrote it in advance.
Definitely.
He's talking about optimism. He said in his first line, it's a strange time to be optimistic about global media, but he is. And he lists a bunch of 6 reasons for his New Year cheer. I mean, the list that he does is pretty niche in the sense that he's got a revival in local news. You get rises of Apple TV. He talks about China Substacks, which is Substacks about China rather than Substacks from China for obvious reasons. Proper real world skepticism in crypto journalism, and a return. I thought this was stretching a little bit. A return to alternative voices on Twitter. So it's not just the big publisher players or the big personalities. It's like people that have got a different point of view. Which okay, but
to be fair, right?
Who are they?
To be fair to Ben, there's when I was writing about the death of Twitter last year, I was interviewing people who were from Black Twitter, and my feed doesn't intersect with theirs even a little bit, really. Yeah. But it is still a vital community hub for a lot of people in Black Twitter. So potentially he's talking about that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it was that kind of thing. It was like activists and people with a different point of view. He also talked about aggregators. He sees a new crop of aggregators that are doing some interesting stuff, and around niche topics like entertainment, movies, stuff like that. All of that is interesting, but his headline reason I thought was actually spot on. And he talks about the death of the media monoculture, which we've just spoken about, right? It's that idea that people are moving away from platforms and dealing with their own audiences. And I thought that was really interesting, that idea that, okay, we're not going to tell you what we think you want to hear. We're actually going to engage with you and find out what you want to hear, and then we're going to publish into that space. And I think that's really interesting.
That's a nice idea.
So there you go, a little bit of optimism.
That does remind me of something. I'm going to cite him again. Brian Morrissey wrote earlier in the year. Brian Morrissey does a really good newsletter called The Rebooting, which is why we cite him so often. But he must have written something about halfway through last year where he said about the fact that recessions were actually good for publishers. It was that sort of thing that, like, when the tide goes out, you see us swimming naked. But he was sort of, his point was that in good times you can actually get sort of a bit sloppy with business practices. There are things you maybe sort of need to do that you end up kicking down the road, whereas recession sort of force you to be lean, to focus on what actually matters, and to really, I forgot what the term was he used. It wasn't right size, but it was focused on what matters, not just the sort of bloating and stuff that can go on. So yeah, that reminded me of that. Well, we've had podcasts, we've had optimism. I thought I should throw in some newsletters. The interesting bit of news that caught my eye this week was that Reach, which is are they the biggest local news publisher in the UK, or the second biggest?
Now they are, yeah.
Now they're the biggest. So they are adopting, 9 of their brands are adopting what they call a newsletter-led approach, meaning that the websites are no longer their flagship means of content delivery, according to Press Gazette. So they trialled this model with 5 regions in November, and they're adding 4 more to it now. They've said that there's no job losses on those sites due to changing that model, but they've also announced that the same week that they've announced 200 redundancies across the business, so make of that what you will. Just when I was sort of reading the Press Gazette piece, it was interesting that it is a better model than chasing page views, web traffic, and all that sort of thing, but they still do have targets. But I was actually quite confused about how those newsletters worked. So when I went on some of the pages to look into this, if you go on the Norfolk one, Norfolk Live, there's like a daily news update for Norfolk, which is, great. That's your local newsletter. But they've also got newsletters for England football, NFL, which I think is American.
It is.
Sorry, I don't do sports. Bake Off, which as far as I finished a couple of months ago. TV and film and more. And it was just a thing that I assume those generalist ones are being sort of produced and promoted across the business, not exclusively by the Norfolk teams. And when I went on some of the other local titles, some of them had like triple the number of newsletters on offer. So it was curious. And I'm a bit curious to see, is this just early days of the newsletter strategy or...
I love the idea of a Norfolk only newsletter for Bake Off. That's just brilliant. I'm properly conflicted about this one because I think it's a really, really good idea in the sense of delivering properly local content. You know, it's by definition, you've opted into it. I want to know about Norfolk or wherever the other ones are. Mm. So you don't need to have the stories that Reach does sometimes about someone's McDonald's getting stolen in the Wirral when the actual site is Birmingham. So that's good. I just can't figure out how they're going to monetize these at the same level that they monetize their websites, because those websites are absolute advertising factories.
Yeah.
So how do they monetize? If there's no web or a limited web presence, how do they monetize these newsletters?
Well, yeah, we need to see what it looks like in practice, right? I mean, for all we can talk about, you know, it being the primary source of news and kind of that primary destination, what does it actually look like? Because they're not going to abandon the websites.
No, it was about sort of what is the flagship. It's not that they're not published on the website. It's just that I suppose the priority shifted, and like they talked about the fact that they want to build these sort of more loyal, more local users. But I think the thing that this really flagged to me is that how much truly local, like if you sign up for the Norfolk newsletter, I did go on the site, and they're sending this twice a day. Is there actually enough local news to justify, like if you're not investing in your local news reporting, are you going to end up with alternative stories slipping in there and people being like, well, this isn't relevant to me and unsubscribing? And I think like they've got various metrics. This is still very, very early days, and they've got various metrics to hopefully try and counteract that. But that kind of product requires investment in your local reporting, and it has to be local because otherwise people will unsubscribe. So it is a bit of an antithesis to what Reach have been doing over the last 2 years, which is very much not that. So I don't quite know how the product is going to have any content to support it at the rate they're going.
Well, I mean, talk to Joshy Herman about exactly that.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. On one hand, if I was, I was just thinking about this. On one hand, if I was him, I'd be thinking, oh my God, Reach is coming for our lunch. And on the other hand, I'd be thinking, yeah, bring it, because you will just do a crappy job and we will look amazing.
Yeah, it's that what this launch is at odds with the other stuff they've been doing over the last few years. So one of the paths is going to have to give at some point.
This week I spoke with Richard Reeves, CEO of the AOP, about diversity and inclusion in media. We talked about efforts to improve DE&I, problems of retention, and about how ageism impacts women particularly. I started by asking Richard if he thought the media deserves its reputation as an industry that can be unwelcoming of people who are not straight, white, male, middle class, and able-bodied.
Is the answer just yes for about 10 minutes?
I guess it is. It's not something that we're particularly proud about, but and I think collectively as an industry, there's a lot of work being done to address that perception, but it doesn't come without some substance. I think often, and there are other industries that probably ask similar questions, but it's really about people feeling comfortable that they belong in an industry and that they themselves can see themselves represented within that industry. And I guess a bit like the financial services, historically the media has gravitated towards their own. We had a session earlier this year where we had a number of contributing speakers, but one initiative that I do admire, which I also feel very passionately that everybody within our industry should be a part of, is the ISBA all-in census, well, not ISBA, the Advertising Association specifically, but Bobby Carley, who is part of the Diversity and Inclusion program run at ISBA and is actually the lead on that. She shared some statistics at our session, which came directly from the all-in census that was obviously conducted earlier in the year. And it was interesting. I mean, it surveyed over 16,000 advertising and marketing professionals to understand really the state of play in terms of representation within the industry. And you can't sugarcoat those findings. They're statistics. They exist. And you know, the findings really suggested that around 32% of black people, 27% of Asian people, and 20% of people with disabilities said they would leave this industry because they don't feel that they belong. And we also had another speaker who's a lead at Brand Metrics and part of the Media for All program. And they also shared very, very similar insights that were not something to be particularly proud of. I mean, there is very definitely progress in recruitment of more diverse talent. But many still feel that there isn't enough being done within their companies to help these people thrive. Many feel that they don't have the same equal opportunities to progress. Yeah. And training and development sometimes is a bit challenging in terms of being eloquently programmed towards their needs. So yes, I think it's fair for you to state that, Peter, but I also would like to temper that with an observation. When you have initiatives like All-In Census and you have the All-In Hub, which is now providing sort of support like the 9-step action and various other things, there is clearly a commitment and some progress being made, and there is definitely the will and the want, certainly amongst the community that we work with. I would suggest that every organisation within there is on a journey, some at different places, some being more effective than others. But the heartening conclusion from the fact that they're all on journeys for the benefit of the listeners to this is that they are also sharing their learnings and their experiences and benefiting from sharing and benefiting those that they're trying to serve through sharing, because nobody's stupid enough to think that they know all the answers and have it right. And everything that has meaning will only get better if we listen and learn from each other and also avoid being defensive. You know, you cannot turn a deaf ear to voices that rightfully are demanding to be heard within your organisation. And so we're not going to get there overnight, but we are on journeys, and we are definitely acknowledging that we can do better and keen to learn from others. And the support of some really amazing external organisations. We at AOP have been working with a number over these last 3 or 4 years. We started some work with Project 23. We introduced them to our HR steering group. More recently, we've been obviously working with another organisation called Get Zen, and these are people that effectively come from within our own industry, but have evolved, if you like, to provide services to through their own commitment to create change, and their experiences are informing the approach of these organisations.
Well, I've spoken in the past to Gary.
Gary, fantastic guy. Yeah.
And the stuff that he talks about. What I think is the interesting part of this is it's real world. It's not theory. It's not just, let's do this because it's a nice thing to do. It's very much about, organisational sustainability and effectiveness in the end. If I ask you, what does a truly diverse staff look like? Is there a picture there, or is that still an aspiration?
It's interesting. There are definitely bright lights that I could direct you to that I see as real examples within organisations. A number of publishers are working with, for example, Ali Owen, who runs the Brixton Finishing School, and that is an organisation that's very committed to addressing this and supporting organisations. And we, again, at one of our sessions earlier in the year, we had 2 graduates that had come through Brixton that are now employees at the Mail Metro Media Group, and Ryan All, who is obviously a senior figure within that organisation and somebody who actually represents that organisation within AAP's board. He's very much a champion at driving this change. And we heard case studies, testimonials from both of these graduates about their journey into that organisation, and also testimonials from Ryan about how they have directly impacted the graduates, the thinking, the approach, and the process within those organisations. So there are some fantastic examples, but I think, what you touched on is really that accountability, and I think it still can be pretty challenging, if not devastating, for new hires to discover that employees have sort of brought them in as part of the tick box exercise. So I think the caution and the lesson learned from most organisations is that we need to be sure that we can walk the walk, if you like, and that comes down to making sure that you talked about Gary and a number of other practitioners out there who are equipped to provide the support. Then there are the industry commitments, as I touched on earlier, such as ad associations, All In. It's harder for an organisation to be ignorant and not make the appropriate provision now when you have very simple resources to guide you, like the 9-step action plan that comes out from this All In hub. But I think the bit that we haven't said, but I think you've kind of alluded to, is that it needs to be a company-wide commitment. It's when you are adopting policies for better address in terms of diversity and inclusion and indeed equity as well. You can't have the same people meeting every month. I think that we also recognise that whilst we may be appearing to be developing the right approach in terms of attracting more diverse representation within our organisations at entry level, we have to continue to hold the light on ourselves and ask: is this being done at board level? Can you honestly say that this approach is reflected throughout the organisation? Can these people coming in at entry level see themselves reflected throughout their organisation? And when I talk about, not just the same people meeting every month, but with no, in the past historically, there was an inclination to sort of gravitate towards, right, well, now we've got people who represent different communities within our organisation. Let's bring them together every month so that they can sort of chat amongst themselves. If they're not empowered to then expand that conversation so that everybody is a part of that conversation and is touched by it, then nothing will change. So to affect the change, everybody with that authority coming from the very top down needs to feel empowered to be in a position to be able to truly represent and also to be supported by the necessary resources in order to achieve that. So there is more we can do, but it's about learning the best way to do it. And I think one of the starting points for every organisation is to look at itself at every level. And for this to succeed, it really needs to be a culture driven from the very top.
I mean, there's a certain irony in you and me talking about this, given that we're both white men of a certain age. But do you think that just the very fact that it is people, it is mostly white males, older white males that are running the show, for good or for ill, that's where a lot of this focus needs to be? I don't think I'm not saying there's a lot of, there's a reluctance to take on these DE&I initiatives, but not being reluctant is different from being enthusiastic. Do you see that as part of your role, is to get management people enthusiastic?
Absolutely. And in terms of that commitment, if I was to look at the content that we've produced and the events that we've delivered over the last two years, we could go back further, but I think really that we've all, over these last 3 years, reevaluated. We've had sort of campaign messages around advertising becoming purpose before profit. As publishing organisations and content creators, we should be putting purpose before profit. This has been coming for a while, but I think, yes, my responsibility and my role is to make sure that we present the very best examples and connections to the very best practitioners to help people who have that will and that want to support them in that journey. And I don't want to come across as naive, but certainly within the community that I work with, those creators of quality content online, I don't see anybody within that community pushing back on this. I do absolutely see what you're saying. One can concur. A lot of these organizations are run by people like you and myself who have been in the industry for 30 odd years and risen through the ranks. But that's not to say that we're not capable of recognizing the limitations of what came before and what the opportunities, and they are opportunities going forward. Whether it takes a 57-year-old white middle-aged man who runs a newsroom to identify and then embrace this opportunity, or whether it's because of a more diverse newsroom where people are representing other opinions and the collective of that newsroom recognise the opportunity. But there are opportunities. We can't change the world overnight, but I would like to believe, I try to be positive, and I'd like to believe that there is a genuine desire from even within those communities who have, if you like, had limited views around certain things, to expand their knowledge and to embrace other opinions so that they can become better balanced and better informed about their own approach and application in life. So that we've got an enormous amount to do, but I don't think that the fact that people like yourself and myself who may sit in a certain box, that there is nothing out there that says that we shouldn't be having the conversation. In fact, to the contrary, we have a responsibility to not only open our own minds, but to challenge our peers and those around us that, if you like, look and behave in similar ways, to make sure that we encourage everybody to open their eyes a bit and reconsider.
I read one of the things on your site where it says, "Is ageism the biggest ism in the world?" Is it?
Well, it kind of is, actually. Ali Owen, again, at the Brixton Finishing School, I think is the person that sort of identified that as being, quite genuinely a problem. And I think what's really interesting is what people are doing to address that, in terms of recognizing that the opportunity. I think there is I think at the time when Ali talked about it, she used examples. She talked about the work that they're doing with, Brixton are doing with WPP's Uninvisibility Project. And it's, I think it's an initiative called Visible Start. You know, we know through the most recent census that we're an aging population that works longer. And yet, within our industry, at the age of about 45, there's a very sincere risk of cut-off. And initiatives like Visible Start is looking at how we can create opportunities for people to, if you like, reskill and provide value back into the industry. I mean, we if we're talking about representation, surely, obviously, that's got to include people that have fantastic skills that are potentially transferable, that could, with relatively simple investment in time, in terms of time and resource, upskill digitally, but they're bringing in other values and other knowledge and information that, again, help a diverse and inclusive workforce be more rounded and more balanced. I think this initiative was perhaps initially motivated by the fact that for certainly women within the workforce, they were sort of facing a bit of a double whammy, you know, that both ageism and sexism. And I think that one of the other sort of embarrassing legacies of the working world is that, you know, the way in which women were viewed within the market, in the workplace, and that, you know, once that lady, no matter how promising her career might have been, and then she, you know, shifts her focus into the family that she's creating, and for some ridiculous reason, those factors seem to compromise opportunity and progression for that particular gender within the workforce, simply by virtue of being who they are. And so, yeah, I think ageism is very real. But again, like when we talked about other aspects of diversity and inclusion, there is some not only strong practitioners, but some really proactive organisations, agencies in particular, provide a very good example of how they are retraining, reskilling and bringing these people back into the workforce, because they recognise so many other important values that they bring if they are, as an organisation, going to be truly balanced and diverse.
So one of the things that I'm seeing, again, reading the work that you guys have done around this, is the idea that getting younger, diverse talent in the door isn't not necessarily the problem. Getting them to stay is the problem. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try and get these guys to stay, but if you're bringing older people in, they may be more likely to stay. Is that a fair assumption?
I tell you what, I mean, in this context, I'm not going to apply any of the sort of, you know, race, religion, gender, or anything else to this, because I you know, I've got to reflect on my own career, and you know, isn't part of being young about wanting to be able to sample, taste, and explore all the wonderful things that life can offer you? And
I can just about remember that.
Yeah, indeed. But, you know, it's also about finding out who you are, what you want from life, and the balance in that. So, of course, you know, a younger workforce is naturally going to sort of be more open to further exploration and experimentation with new experiences. So there may well be an argument, and someone like Ali Hearn probably can provide me a statistic to back this up, whereby the suggestion is that an older employee is probably somebody that is less likely to jump about because they want that stability and continuity in their life, whereas perhaps a younger employee isn't ready for, you know, that continuity, that settling down a little bit. They you know. So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that, Peter, because I don't think I'm educated enough to give you a genuine insight of whether there's anything more to it. But I do. I do think it does talk slightly to the point where you're saying, the diversity and inclusive strategies sort of are easier to address at entry level. I think we need to, again, bring back the point that attracting them into the business is one thing, but retaining them in the business really comes down to the fact that they feel that they are both heard and represented. What we're talking about here, it applies to everybody, and I do worry sometimes that even expressions like diversity washing and everything, it sort of infers that people are just about the ticking the box, and I actually like to believe that isn't. Of course, it does happen, but I like to see the good in people, and I think that when I talk to the community we represent, the will and the good is there.
I agree with you. I think most people are genuinely caring and want to see other people doing well. We all make mistakes.
Good
God knows
yeah.
I made enough of that.
Well, it's having the mettle and the maturity to admit to your mistakes, and I think that's key here. And I think that what practitioners, you talked about Gary earlier. I remember Gary sort of saying to one of our sessions, it's like, don't be defensive. There's no point in being defensive. No one's trying to call you out here. But don't be afraid to talk and that's and learn, and that's how we're going to improve, isn't it?
Yeah. No. You sound optimistic that there's loads of work to be done, but it's headed in the right direction. Do you think, is that fair?
Yeah, it is fair. I mean, I think I'd be crap at my job if I was a pessimist. And whilst we all go through periods in life as you grow up where you could be grotesquely cynical, it's not healthy. I don't like being cynical. I want to see and believe the good in everyone. And I have to tell you, when I talked about them earlier, but when Ryan brought these two graduates, Ryan at the Mail, onto the platform to talk about their experience as graduates coming from underrepresented communities and being given an opportunity to work within a mainstream media organisation like that, when they talked, I was genuinely moved emotionally.
We also ask our guests one more question. I think you might have done this before, where we ask you, what's your favourite piece of media at the moment?
If I'm brutally honest with you, I love reading books. And when I turn off my computer at the end of the evening, and I have my massive commute of about 5 foot to my kitchen, I do still sit down and give myself an hour to I think I'm the best movie producer in the world. When I read a book, the vivid nature by I don't read anything of any value, but it takes me on a journey, and it certainly allows me to relax and get into the right place.
Well, there's lots going on with us at Media Voices. Esther, why don't you tell the listeners exactly what they can expect from us over the course of the year?
A year is a long time, guys. The next few months I can tell you about. We've got loads going on. We're sorting through the Publisher Podcast Award entries now, which is really exciting. There are some amazing podcasts and hopefully the latest series of lessons from award-winning Publisher Podcast should be coming soon, shouldn't it, Peter?
Yes, Esther. Coming soon.
So that's all coming up soon. We'll obviously let you all know about that via our new email newsletter, which you can sign up for at voices.media.
Our email system may have changed, but the ways you can support us have not. If you do want to forward that email across to anybody else, that really helps. You can also go to our Ko-Fi page, which allows you to donate to us on a one-off or recurring basis. And as Esther mentioned, sign-ups to the newsletter really do help us talk to sponsors, partners. So anything you can do around that would really, really help us out.
And it's a good newsletter.
It's a great newsletter. For now, until next week, thank you so much for listening, and
stay optimistic.
Yeah.